Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet part 1 of the Spring Cellar Sweater. To get the pattern, be sure to click the link in the description or go to your favorite search engine and simply type in Moogly Spring Cellar Sweater. To make this pattern, I used a USI 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. This one happens to be by Furls. Because this is a garment, it's important that you use the right hook size to get gauge. I also used Bernat Softee Cotton, which is a 3 or light DK weight yarn. This one is a cotton and acrylic blend, and I used it in warm red. Depending on the size you're making, you'll need anywhere from 5 to 7 balls. It's also handy to have some stitch markers. For this pattern, because it is a garment with multiple sizes, it is very important that you have the written pattern and don't try and just make it from the video tutorial, even though I'm going to cover just as much as I can. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at the Spring Cellar Sweater. The Spring Cellar Sweater is crocheted from the bottom up in 2 pieces. We do first the back, which you can see here, which is all of this sort of modified granny stitch sort of stitch that I've been doing. This back piece right here, excluding the ribbing. We're going to add those later. In part 1 here, we're going to make the back. In part 2, we will make the front. Again, if you look closely, you can see this is stitched from the bottom up, and we will make this front piece as well as both of these sides. In part 3, we will add our ribbed hem and finish off our V-neck with this beautiful ribbing right here. Finally, in part 4, we'll add our sleeves. I've chosen to add long sleeves to mine, again with matching ribbed cuffs to match the hem and the neckline. But I've already been asked, can you turn this into a vest? And absolutely. If you choose in part 4, you can do one round around the sleeve opening just to sort of firm it up, and then go right to your cuffs if you prefer to make this in a vest style. But we're going to make it with long sleeves, and I'm going to be demonstrating in the smallest size listed. So let's talk about the sizes for a moment. Here are the sizes and schematic for the Spring Cellar Sweater. You can see this pattern is offered in 4 sizes: small, medium, large, extra large, 2X, 3X, and 4X, 5X. This is a very oversized fit sweater. It's meant to be large and slouchy, so we're able to sort of combine the sizes like that. That said, we've also included all of the schematic measurements down here. So you can choose, not so much even based on the size you might buy in the store, but choose your size based on these measurements and what's going to fit you and match the favorite garments that you have in your closet. In the photos of the sweater, you can see me wearing the large extra large. That's the size I was just showing you. In these videos, I'm going to be making the small or medium, but you'll want to follow along with the written pattern and be sure to use the numbers that apply to the size that you want to make. So I'm going to begin part 1, the back of our sweater, with row 1. We work a row of foundation double crochet stitches, and of course the number will depend on size. For the smallest size, I'm working 64 stitches. For the largest, you need 100. Again, you'll want to refer to the written pattern. There's just a ton of information in there you'll need. So you can see here, I've already made my slip knot and chained 2. So to begin my row of foundation double crochet, I'm going to yarn over and go into the stitch farthest away from the hook, the chain right next to the slip knot. And I like to go into the back hump of the chain. It gives a much nicer finished edge to our work. So I pull up a loop through that chain, and now you can see we've got 3 loops left on our hook. These 2 chains at the beginning are not going to count as a stitch. They're just going to count as our turning chain. And the loop that I just pulled up is going to count as the chain at the bottom of our first stitch. With foundation double crochet, we make the chain and the stitch all at once. So now what we want to do is yarn over and pull a loop through just that first loop. Then we finish our double crochet. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and pull through 2. This is a great opportunity to use our stitch markers and go ahead and put one right in that very first stitch. That way you won't get confused by your turning chain and you'll know where to stop when you come back for row 2. To continue your row of foundation double crochet, we yarn over again, and then we want to look for the 2 loops at the bottom of the previous stitch. We insert our hook right above or under, depending on how you're looking at it, those 2 loops. Yarn over and pull up a loop. Now, this loop will be the chain at the bottom of this stitch. So we yarn over and pull through just that loop, and then yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. Let's make one more. Yarn over, insert your hook under the 2 loops at the bottom of the previous stitch, and it's the stitch we just made. Don't go back to that first one. There we go. Now, go ahead, as you're making these, pull that loop that makes our chain at the bottom of the stitch. Make sure you take your time to pull that loop up to the size of the other loops. This will help prevent the curve at the bottom of your foundation stitch row. Then we yarn over and pull a loop up through that first loop. And then we finish our stitch. Yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. So now we simply continue making foundation double crochets until we have the number needed for our size. Okay, so here I am at the end of row 1 with all the stitches I need for the width of my sweater. Now I'm ready to begin row 2. To begin row 2, we can go ahead and turn, and then you can chain 3, use a stacked single crochet, or use any other double crochet substitute you like. I prefer the chainless starting double crochet, which I make like this. Let me get these out of the way here. I'm going to start by pulling up my loop on my hook to the height of a double crochet, or maybe just a hair taller. Then I'm going to secure the top of the loop with my finger so that it can't move around on the hook. Then I yarn over with the loop itself. Then I insert my hook right into that first stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. You'll notice I still have a hold of the top of that loop so it can't move around. I want to yarn over again, pull through that loop, and behind the yarn over. At this point, I can release the top of that loop, yarn over, and pull through to finish the stitch. Again, this is just my preferred way of starting a row of double crochet, but you can use whichever way you prefer. I do like to go ahead and put my stitch marker in it though. Then we are going to skip the next stitch and work 2 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. So what does this mean? If we look closely here, let me actually pull up that loop and put my hook down so I can use my fingers. We've worked into this stitch right here. Now we skip this stitch. Then we're going to work between the previous stitch, which would be the one we just skipped, and the next stitch, which would be, well, the next stitch. So what does it mean to work in between? Rather than working under the top 2 loops of either of those stitches, we're going to go straight through between the 2 posts. This is the same place I might enter if I were trying to work some sort of post stitch, but we're not working a post stitch. We're not going around the post. We go straight through to the back of the fabric. So let me get my hook here again and get my yarn back on my hook, and I'll show you what that looks like. There we go. Alrighty, so remember, this is the next stitch. We're going to skip that one and work between that one and the next one. So we come right down here, just like if we were going to make a post stitch, but we go ahead and send our hook all the way to the back of the fabric. Yarn over, pull up our loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. Standard double crochet. So the trick to this one is really just where we're putting that double crochet stitch. If you've worked a granny square stitch before or the granny stitch, you're familiar with working between the posts. After we've put one stitch there, we want to put a second double crochet right in that same exact spot. There we go. Then, if we go back to our instructions, you'll see we're ready to start the section that begins with the asterisk. We skip the next 2 stitches, 1, 2, and then work 2 double crochets between the previous and next stitch. So that means we're going to skip over those 2. Let me get my yarn over on there and then go right in between that one the last one that we just skipped and the next one. So there's 1 double crochet, and there's 2 right in that same space. So if you're confused by the wording, let's just look at what we've got here. We've got a double crochet in that first stitch, then we skip 1, then we put 2 double crochets between the posts, skip 2, 2 double crochets between the posts. So you can start to see what our pattern here is going to look like, because that is our repeat. Skip 2, 2 double crochet between the previous and next. 1, 2. Oh, there we go. Let me straighten out my yarn a little bit. There we go. All right, so then 1 yarn over there, skip 2, put our stitch right there between the posts. And we're going to continue this all the way across until we get to the end, so I'll meet you there. Okay, so here I am right at the end of row 2, so we can finish it up together. You can see I've worked my pairs of double crochets between each pair of double crochets from row 1. So now we've got just 2 stitches left, so we finish up our row by skipping the next stitch and working a double crochet right in the top of the last stitch. There we go. So that is what it should look like at the end of row 2. Okay, so now we turn and we can begin row 3. Once again, I'm going to start with the chainless starting double crochet, and you can use whichever double crochet substitute you prefer. Chain 3 also works great. We're going to seam the sides of our sweater together, so these stitches will kind of get sewn together anyway, and really you can just use whichever stitch makes you most comfortable. There we go. Alrighty. So now that we've got our first double crochet in that first stitch, we're going to work another double crochet right in that first stitch. There we go. Then, right away, we begin our repeat with the asterisk. We skip the next 2 stitches and work 2 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. Sounds familiar, right? So let's look at our work. You can see now when we skip 2 double crochets and then work between the previous and the next, we're going to be going right between those pairs of double crochets. So visually, it's a lot easier than it is to write out. We'll skip over those 2 and go right in that space right there. So there's 1 and 2. Go back to your work, skip the next 2. You can see right where that space is waiting for you. Put 2 more double crochets in there. And that's the repeat that will take us all the way across until there are 3 stitches remaining. So I'll meet you when we get to the end of row 3. Okay, so here we are at the end of row 3, and you can see there are just 3 stitches remaining. So to finish up this row, we're going to skip these next 2 stitches, and now we put our last 2 double crochets in our very last stitch, right in the top. There's 1, and there's 2. Okay, so this is what it should look like at the end of row 3. You might notice, as you can see here on mine, I'm kind of squeezing it in and exaggerating it so that you can see it, but there is a little bit of a downward curve at this point, and that's okay. That's intentional. We want our sweater to curve in a little bit at the bottom, and when we add our hem, that will pull it back out straight as well. So at this point, one thing to note is that each of these rows has the same stitch count, so that's something to keep track of, and it makes it a little easier as you make this portion of the pattern. Now, to continue the back body, what we do is repeat rows 2 and 3 a certain number of times depending on what size you're making. If you're making the small, medium, large, or extra large, you want to repeat rows 2 and 3 through row 16. That is ending on a row 2 repeat. For the 2 largest sizes, you'll want to add 2 more rows and go to row 18. But it's just rows 2 and 3 over and over again, maintaining that same stitch count. So I'll see you when we have 16 or 18 rows done. So now I have finished the back body portion of our sweater. You can see since I'm making the smaller size, I've made 16 rows. Let's count them once together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Remember, if you're making either of the 2 larger sizes, you'll need a total of 18 rows, so go ahead and make 2 more. Now we're ready to move on to the yoke. So now, to make row 1 of the yoke, we start by slip stitching in the first 5 stitches, and this is the case for all the sizes. So we have our first stitch right here. We can go right into that one and make a loose slip stitch. We will be working around these 5 stitches when we work around our armhole, so we want to keep it a little bit loose. The way to do that is when you pull up the loop for the stitch, go ahead and take a moment. Make sure it's the same size as the other loop before you pull it on through to finish the slip stitch. After you've finished it, make sure not to pull back up on the end of the yarn that's attached to the skein, as that will tighten up that stitch, and we want it to stay loose. So there's 1. Do the same thing. 2, 3, 4, and 5. There we go. Now, that last one, we're going to put our actual first taller stitch in as well. So we're considering it as skipping 4 stitches. We've worked in 4 stitches. Now we're in the 5th stitch, and we're going to start putting our taller double crochet stitches right in that same space. So from right here, what we now want to do is work another double crochet substitute. Could be a chain 3 if that's what you prefer. I'm going to, of course, pull up my loop and make my chainless starting double crochet here. And I've got my stitch marker handy so that as I finish up the stitch, I can go ahead and put my stitch marker in our new first stitch of the row. This is the one we're going to be coming back to on the next row. This has given us, basically, it's going to be half of our armpit when we seam together with the front. So we've got our chainless starting double crochet or whatever double crochet made into what's essentially the 5th stitch of the row. And then we are going to work another double crochet into that same stitch. And from here, it's back to the stitch pattern that we've been using so far. You can see this puts us in just the right spot to go ahead and skip 2 stitches and then go right back between those 2 and make another 2 double crochets. 1 and 2. There we go. Then we're just going to continue that all the way across until there are 4 stitches left. You'll remember I talked specifically about how we're counting ourselves as having really only skipped 4 stitches here because we put that double crochet in the 5th stitch. We want to mirror that on the other side and leave those last 4 stitches unworked. So I'll see you as we get to the end of row 1 of our yoke. Okay, now we're ready to finish up row 1 of our yoke together. You can see I've got 7 stitches left in the previous row. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skip the next 2 stitches and work 2 double crochets right in the top of this actual stitch right here, the 3rd stitch. When I do that, that should leave 4 stitches unworked here at the end of the row. So we'll check our work here in just a moment. There we go. So let's see. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, it matches exactly what we have at the beginning of the row. So I'll have to squish it up a little bit so you can see, but you can see the notches that come in on either side. And now we're ready for row 2. And now we can return to the same row repeat that we were doing before, repeating rows 2 and 3. This time we're going to end on a row 3 repeat as we build up the yoke. Make sure you stick to this new, shorter stitch count. So here we are on our back and I have completed the yoke. I'm making the size small, so that means I've made 15 rows. And we start counting again where we've come in to create the yoke. So I would start and pull that over here so it's a little more central. I would start counting right here again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Again, the number of rows you'll make here depends on what size you're making. The largest size, you'll make 21. You should end on a row 3 repeat, which means one of the rows that started and ended with 2 double crochets. Now we're ready to move on to the right shoulder. Now, I'm calling this one the right shoulder and the other one the left shoulder, but as you've probably noticed, this material is completely reversible. So right side and wrong side doesn't really matter until the end when you sew it together. And really, at that point, you can pick whichever side you want to be the right side versus the wrong side. Again, they're pretty much the same. So let's move to the right shoulder, row 1. We're going to continue. We haven't broken our yarn yet, and we're going to start with a chainless starting double crochet. So let me turn my work here, and we'll start stitching. Again, you can use whatever sort of double crochet substitute or just a chain 3, whatever you prefer. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and get my stitch marker back in that new first stitch. And now we can take a look at our instructions. It says to skip the next stitch and then work 2 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. Essentially, we're going to be working the same stitch pattern we've been working all along, no new stitch pattern here, but we're going to start, or rather stop, when we're only partially across the row. We want to leave a little neck opening. We're making one sort of extended shoulder section here, and then we'll make one on the other side. So let's continue to work in pattern. Depending on the size that you're making, the number of repeats here that you'll make will vary. So I'm going to go ahead and start making some of these stitches. So here I have almost finished the right shoulder for the size small. So let's talk through what I've done so far. We've got our chainless starting double crochet in the first stitch, then we skip the next stitch, and work 2 double crochets between the previous and the next. Then we come to the part with the asterisk when you follow along with the written pattern. It says, of course, to skip the next 2 stitches and 2 double crochet between the previous and the next stitch, and then repeat that a number of times depending on your size. For the small, it's 4, and you can see we've done that here. 1, 2, 3, 4 more times. The largest size, you'll do it 11 times. Then we skip the next stitch and work a double crochet in the stitch after that. So let's do that together. You can see right here, we skip the next stitch and double crochet in the next. Now for the size small, that should give me a total of 14 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. After that, we're going to turn and work back in that same stitch pattern again, the same way it would, but just, of course, to the end of the row. So right now, we're going to leave a bunch of stitches worked, and then we'll come in and join to add our other shoulder. No matter what size you're making, you only needed to add 2 rows here for the shoulder. So here's one, and then we work another row in pattern for our second. Okay, so as you can see, I've worked a second row in our stitch pattern. And again, because I'm making the small size, it should have 14 stitches. Now we're ready to break the yarn for the first time. We can leave this long if you'd like to use it to sew the 2 pieces together, or you can simply cut it off and leave enough to weave in. Okay, so as you can see, I went ahead and finished off the yarn. Then we want to turn our work again so that we can skip a certain number of stitches here in the middle before we join for the other shoulder. So for the small size, I need to skip 26 stitches, and I went ahead and put a stitch marker there to help mark where I begin. But let's go ahead and count those out together. You can see right there is the last stitch we worked into. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, and I went ahead and put a stitch marker in the next stitch to help me. Again, depending on what size you are making, you will need to skip more stitches in between your 2 shoulders. Then we're ready to go ahead and join with our yarn to that marked stitch right there. Okay, so now we're ready to begin our left shoulder. And what I want to do is join with a double crochet to that marked stitch right there. If you'd like, you can join with a slip stitch and chain 3, and then make your stacked single crochet, whatever you like to do. What I like to do is a standing double crochet, so let me show you how I do that right now. Particularly when I'm making garments, I like to stay away from adding any extra knots. So what I'm going to do is just put a little flip in my yarn like this. Let me show you again. I just kind of flip it over like that, and then drop that loop right on my hook. So you can see the end of the yarn is in front. Then I'm going to hold on tightly to that end here with the fingers of my hook hand that I'm not using to hold my hook. I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to take a second just to get these a little closer to the hook. There we go. So now I've got 2 loops on my hook just in the air. We're going to grab our fabric and insert the hook right in that marked stitch. Yarn over and pull up a loop. Now I'm going to take a moment and just scooch all my little loops on my hook back down together here, and then yarn over and pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through 2. And that's how I like to join with a double crochet, particularly when I am making garments. So then I will go ahead and move that stitch marker on up. You can see we still have 2 loops right there at the top that we can work under when we come back for our next row. After that, it's really that same stitch pattern again. Remember, this is a row that starts with 1, so we are going to skip that next stitch and work 2 double crochets right in between that previous stitch and the next. And we just work in our pattern all the way across to the end, and then of course, add a second row again in our pattern. So now I have made my second shoulder. You can see here, there are just 2 rows for all sizes. Now I can go ahead and weave in the ends and go ahead and block the back piece if I'd like. After this, we'll be moving on to part 2. One note, even with the small, I wanted to show you, this is all the yarn that I had left from our first skein. So if you're making the larger sizes, you probably have already broken into the second skein. If you haven't, be sure to use a new skein to start part 2. And that's how to crochet part 1 of the Spring Cellar Sweater. I hope you enjoy this crochet along on Moogly, and don't forget to like and subscribe.